I think another process that goes on is, of course, in the litigation process.
Yeah.
There's winners and losers.
Yeah.
And I believe that just by looking at statistics alone, a majority of the winners are going to be, of course, female. I mean, just looking at statistics.
It is the data.
It's well-published data.
Yeah.
I think that even if you have an unhealthy parent, all it takes is one unhealthy parent to prolong the litigation.
Right.
But I think that unhealthy parent is the most vulnerable and the most influenceable. And that what occurs is that, in a way, the system has a life of its own after a while.
Right.
And the system, the attorneys, the other paraprofessionals involved will begin to exploit that unhealthy parent.
Right.
Because they're most impressionable.
Yeah.
And then the more they're exploited, the more they're influenced, they get to a point where it's just not resolvable,
Yeah.
because they're committing so much perjury, so much lying. They're being told so many false things.
Yeah.
About child support. You can get this, that, or the other. You
Yeah.
can be the primary custodian. The whole thing is about the win-lose situation.
Right.
And before you know it, the child's not even considered. The
Yeah.
child becomes an object of possession.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the child is already a possession in the system. And that's understandable because they're all detached. They're not emotionally involved in this case, whereas the parents are.
Yeah.
And you can have one parent that's adversely emotionally affected, another parent that is also affected emotionally. And it doesn't even matter if you have a parent that's primarily concerned with the child or a parent that's not. All it takes is one unhealthy parent to kind of persist in the litigation.
Yeah.
Because that unhealthy parent is manipulating the system, and the system is manipulating them.
Yeah.
And there's kind of a bi-directional exploitation.
There is, and then the judges will often say, "Well, you two can't get along." You're like, "Well, wait a minute. I have to respond. If I don't respond to this unhealthy parent,
who cares if I don't get along? I mean,
Yeah.
the point is, who cares? We don't have to get along. We have the fundamental right not to get along.
Yeah.
I mean, we have the fundamental right to respond or not respond. We have the fundamental right to decide if we're going to respond on OFW or not respond to OFW. We have the fundamental right to waive our Fourth Amendment rights,
Yeah.
or not waive our Fourth Amendment rights.
Right.
And I think I'm sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, no.
But I think that the whole concept of co-parenting, it's important. Parents get along. It's certainly much better to not have conflict or lesser degrees of conflict than higher degrees of conflict. But I think that when a case is going on and on and on and on,
Yeah.
and you've had one party attempt to dissolve the case, as I did when I non-suited, but then it was reinstated, who's reinstating the case, particularly when you have pending claims about money?
Yeah.
And what's the case being reinstated for?
Yeah.
About pending claims of money.
Yeah.
And then when you have the child custody evaluator giving estimates about how much they think they should get paid, and then they're a direct recipient of a court order
Yeah.
for a certain amount of money,
Yeah.
what's the underlying motivation?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not the child.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
Exactly.
to deprive liberty and to deprive property and money from one parent to benefit another.
And when you're talking about this, there's a couple of things, and sorry for going on here,
No,
but
it's fine.
you non-suited, you wanted out of the system, and they drug you back in.
I non-suited at a time when we were litigating for 3.5 years without any progress. And at the time when a non-suit, if there's any surviving affirmative pleadings, independent affirmative pleadings, such as sanctions, that can survive a non-suit. But my belief was there wasn't any pending independent affirmative pleadings. The pleadings were dependent upon the the case that was occurring at the time. And I had also, at the time, no longer waived my Fourth Amendment rights for search and seizure by the child custody evaluator, who was an agent of the court. Whereas previously I had waived my Fourth Amendment rights. And I objected in the courtroom, and the judge disregarded it and reassigned the custody evaluator, Alissa Sherry, against my objections. She's a court-ordered agent of the court.
Yeah.
And so, as that, her job was to intrude upon or obtain private information of both parties.
Yeah.
And I no longer waived my Fourth Amendment rights,
Yeah.
so I objected.
Yeah.
And lawfully, that should have been respected,
Yeah.
but it wasn't. So then, she was granted a certain amount of money based upon the judge's ruling,
Right.
which should not have occurred.
Yeah.
And other attorney fees were granted based upon what I believe was an abuse of discretion,
Yeah.
because there was no existing case law to support the assignment of attorney fees
Yeah.
whatsoever. And I wasn't allowed to testify.
Yeah. I remember.
And the estimate of monies to be paid by Alissa Sherry is purely by hearsay,
Yeah.
which shows that there was collaboration between Marshall Thompson and Alissa Sherry concerning that amount. So there were several things that I believe constitute an abuse of discretion and a violation of state statute,
Yeah.
as well as federal statute.
Yeah. So